Oh, hello! Welcome back to my channel and to a DIY video. Today I'll be showing you how I made my DIY coffin that I had for my 30th birthday party. And if you haven't seen that video, I'll link it up in the cards. It was a good time. So without further ado, here's how I built a coffin for my birthday. So first I had to figure out how big I wanted my coffin to be, so I laid down in my living room and had my dad help measure out on the floor just to get a better visual. I knew I wanted my coffin to be at least 6 feet tall. We are going to get the wood for the coffin.
You got 6 inches on me.
That's what she said.
Look, it's you!
It's you!
Hi, Mom. I'm a movie star.
He's famous now.
I betcha.
We went to Home Depot first, and this is what happens when my dad and I go out in public together. Always a fun time. Home Depot didn't have the wood we were looking for, so we went to Lowe's, and here's my outfit. At this point, we were guesstimating the size of the planks that we would need, and once we started pricing it all out, I realized that a wood coffin is very expensive to make and heavy. I wanted to spend more of my budget for the party on other things, so we decided to make it out of foam instead. We found these big sheets that were much more affordable, so I ended up getting 2 of those. That way it would also be easier to move around and store. But there was one thing I hadn't thought of when it came to the foam sheets: how to get them home. One thing I forgot to do is figure out if this would fit in my car, and it does not. My car is pretty small, so we just tied them down onto my roof and stuck our arms out of my windows to hold it down so it wouldn't fly off. Then we slapped them onto some sawhorses and started measuring, and by we, I mean my boyfriend and my dad. They were both so sweet and helpful. I mostly supervised and gave the final okay for measurements and angles. We started off with figuring out the angles we wanted for the top piece and went from there. We did have a rough idea for the size of everything, but because we changed the angles of everything as we went, it ended up just being a figure it out as you go kind of project. Here's the bottom piece all cut out, and I did lie down on it to make sure that I would fit once we added the sides. I decided to make things easier in that we wouldn't make a lid and it would just be open. Then we started on figuring out the size of the side pieces one by one, and here they are all laid out. After they were done, I measured each piece in case you want to make your coffin the same size, or in case I ever want to do this again for future reference. Feel free to pause to screenshot. The hardest part of the whole construction was definitely the angles, and again, we just eyeballed it and cut the edges with a sharp knife. We left a few extra inches on the ends of each piece for this reason, and we used a box cutter and tested the angles on a scrap piece of foam first, which I highly recommend doing. Then we used a Sharpie to draw the angle onto the final piece to be cut. And this foam is pretty easy to work with. As you can see, you just break the pieces off as you cut. And then we took a stainless steel cheese grater type tool to smooth the edges down and make them more uniform. After placing the edges together to make sure they fit, we then taped it into place. We also numbered the sides that touched to make it easier to figure out which piece went where. And once we were happy with the placement, my boyfriend filled in all of the gaps and cracks with this expanding foam we got from Lowe's. This is the kind that expands up to 1 inch, and it worked really well to hold the pieces together. We also used the Gorilla Glue, but it wasn't as effective by itself, so the inside is held together by a mixture of the two. Because we eyeballed so much of it, there were quite a few gaps and spaces in between the boards on the sides, so the expanding foam was perfect. And we let it sit for a while until it finished expanding, and then I used a knife and that cheese grater thing to sand down the edges. Tried to make it as flat as possible. And there it is, all ready for paint. For paint, I just got the biggest container of black acrylic that I could find at Michael's, and this is a pump, which made it super easy to apply. I got a big painting brush for like $5 from Walmart, and my first idea was to use spray paint to make it black, but I tested it on a spare piece of foam and it melted the foam. I did not like how that looked, so that's why I ended up using acrylic. Painting this was very relaxing. I very much enjoyed just squirting the paint all over the foam and then brushing it. One thing I will recommend if you use this kind of foam, make sure any lettering or indentations are on the inside where you can't see it. When I painted over it, the lettering on the back was still visible, so I'm really glad I only did that on the back. And when it was painted, the foam almost looked like it had wood grain, which was really cool. I wasn't expecting that in the texture. And I used about 3 to 4 coats just to make sure it was very dark. I did have to stipple in the paint on the rougher parts, like the edges, just to make sure that everything was covered. I left the inside unpainted because I knew I'd be lining it with the crushed red velvet, and I got about 7 or 8 feet of fabric from Joann Fabric for the inside. To make the pieces for the lining, I laid the fabric on the side of the coffin and pinned it in place using push pins. Then I marked where the edge was using chalk so I'd know where to cut. And here is the side piece all cut out. And then I did the exact same process for the bottom of the coffin, making sure to label each piece as I cut it out with the chalk. And then once everything was cut out, I laid it all in the coffin to make sure there weren't any gaps. So when it came to actually gluing in the pieces of fabric, I started with the biggest one, which is the bottom piece first, and I tried using contact cement, but that did not work well at all. It actually started to eat the foam and had huge holes in it, so thankfully I managed to save it. And then I just decided to try my trusty hot glue gun, and the hot glue worked perfectly. I also used a piece of a cereal box that I cut out to smooth out the glue under the fabric, and then that way I made sure that all of the edges were glued down and none of the fabric was loose. And once the bottom was glued down, I did the exact same thing with the top piece, just pinning it in place with the push pins first, making sure it was all smoothed out and looking nice. And then I just did the same thing with the bottom piece, pinning it first and then gluing it in place. And while I was gluing it, I did it in sections so the glue didn't dry before I could press down the fabric, and that worked really well. And for the actual gluing, I did a squiggle or a zigzag pattern as I placed the glue just so I could get the most surface area as possible, and then I smoothed it out using that piece of cardboard. And that helped make the edges super smooth, and I went very slowly as I pushed it down, so that way no hot glue bubbled up over the top of the fabric, because we want it all to be hidden and make it look like it was professionally done, of course. This was definitely the most tedious part of making this coffin, trying to make sure that all of the fabric had no wrinkles in it and just kind of slowly going along the edge with my cardboard cutout to make sure there was no glue visible. It was definitely a challenge, but it ended up looking so good. I was so happy with the end result. And for the top of the crushed velvet, I just folded it in on itself so you couldn't really see like a rough edge, and then I made sure to hot glue both pieces to the edge of the coffin, leaving probably like half an inch of the black so you could still see it along the edge. And here is the finished coffin. The inside really makes it look more luxurious than it is, and I love the contrast of the red and black. I'm really excited to use this for future outfit videos and photo shoots, and the best part is I can move it around all by myself because it is super light. And that is it for my DIY coffin video. Hope you enjoyed. I am so happy with how it came out. It has exceeded my expectations. I am kind of sad that I don't have a real wood coffin, but the foam was just so much better for my situation right now with my house, and for ease of carrying it because wood is heavy. But I hope you enjoyed my journey of making this thing. I really couldn't have done it without my dad and my boyfriend, so thank you guys. I love ya! I hope you're having a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!